A waitress was fired on Christmas Eve for giving food to homeless children. When the owner of the restaurant arrived and recognized one of the children, she broke down in tears. The chime from the bell over the door signaled yet another group of cheerful customers arriving at the Sunshine Bistro. Emily, her graying hair hastily tied in a messy bun, smoothed out her creased apron and managed a weary smile. Her eyes, shadowed by deep lines, took in the dining room, a sea of tables covered in crisp white cloths and lit by flickering candlelight. The scent of roasted turkey and warm cinnamon filled the space, blending with the happy buzz of voices and the soft clatter of silverware. Pine garlands and strands of golden lights were wrapped around the dark wood paneling, their glow reflecting in the bright eyes of the diners. Emily moved between the tables, skillfully navigating the crowded floor with a tray of champagne glasses. Her movements were quick, a result of decades of experience, but her shoulders slumped with an unseen weight of private worries. "More wine, sir?" she asked on autopilot, leaning over to refill the glass of a portly gentleman. The man gave a slight nod, his attention fixed on his dinner companion. As she moved away, Emily's gaze drifted to the large picture window at the front of the bistro. Through the condensation on the glass, she saw small, shivering figures. She blinked, trying to bring them into focus, and her heart gave a painful squeeze. They were children, 3 or 4 of them, no older than toddlers to maybe first grade. Their gaunt faces were pressed against the cold glass, their wide eyes staring at the feast laid out within. The smallest one couldn't have been more than 6, her tangled hair barely concealing her hollow eyes and sunken cheeks. Emily felt a hard lump form in her throat, her hands clenching the tray until her knuckles turned white. For a fleeting second, she saw a ghost of herself in their hungry eyes, a piece of a past she fought daily to keep buried. "Emily, Table S is waiting for their appetizers." The sharp voice of Karen, the stern-faced manager, sliced through the air like a whip. Emily flinched, snapping back to the present. She gave a quick nod and started for the kitchen, but not before stealing one more look at the children at the window. They hadn't moved, their pleading eyes following her every step. In the chaos of the kitchen, pots banged and knives chopped against cutting boards in a frenetic dance. Tom, the red-bearded chef with a perpetual grin, called out orders as he expertly juggled sizzling pans. "Emily, dear, grab these canapes for Table S, will you?" Tom said, pushing a plate in her direction. Their eyes met for a second, and his smile faltered. "You all right?" Emily forced another smile. "Sure, just tired. It's a busy night." She picked up the plate, but her thoughts were a million miles away, with the children at the window. Could she do something? A plate of leftovers, maybe? But Karen was a stickler for the rules. Giving away food was an instant firing offense. Emily couldn't lose this job. The bills were piling up, and her only family, her sick nephew, depended on her support. Back in the dining room, Emily served the canapes, her professional smile a mask for the storm raging inside her. Her eyes kept darting back to the window. The children were still there, their expressions a painful mix of hope and defeat. At the bar, Karen stood like a sentinel, her hawk-like eyes scanning the room, her posture ramrod straight, and her lips pressed into a severe line. Emily knew a single misstep wouldn't go unnoticed. The clock on the wall showed 9:30 p.m. She still had hours to go. Emily took a deep, shaky breath, the weight of the decision she faced pressing down on her. Help the children and lose everything, or turn a blind eye and live with the crushing guilt. As she served another round of drinks, her gaze met the eyes of one of the little girls at the window. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. In that child's stare, Emily saw her younger self, terrified and starving. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A new resolve began to harden in her mind. With trembling hands, Emily picked up another tray of champagne, and as she passed through the kitchen, her fingers discreetly slid a plate of freshly baked croissants under her apron. The doorbell chimed again. Emily looked at Karen, then at the children, and finally at the back door. It was time to make a choice. The bell over the door chimed once more, heralding the arrival of yet another smiling group at the Sunshine Bistro. Emily, her gray hair pulled back in its messy bun, adjusted her wrinkled apron and put on a tired smile. Her eyes, etched with deep lines, scanned the dining room filled with white tablecloths and flickering candles. The aroma of roasted turkey and cinnamon hung in the air, mingling with the cheerful chatter and the clink of silverware. Pine wreaths and golden lights trailed along the dark wooden walls, reflected in the diner's bright eyes. Emily weaved through the tables, expertly balancing a tray loaded with champagne flutes. Her steps were swift, the product of decades of experience, but her shoulders carried the invisible burden of unspoken worries. "More wine, sir?" she asked automatically, leaning over to top up the glass of a portly customer. The man nodded absent-mindedly, not taking his eyes off his companion. As she straightened, Emily's gaze was drawn to the large front window. Through the fogged glass she made out small, quivering silhouettes. She blinked, focusing, and her heart clenched. They were children, 3 or 4 at most, their thin faces pressed to the glass, wide eyes locked on the abundance of food inside. The youngest was probably no older than 6, her ragged hair partially covering hollow eyes and gaunt cheeks. Emily felt her throat tighten, her hands clenching the tray so hard her knuckles turned white. For a moment she saw her own reflection in those famished eyes, recalling a distant past she fought to bury. "Emily, Table S is waiting for their appetizers." Karen's sharp voice, the stern-faced manager, tore through the air like a lash. Emily blinked, snapping back to reality. She nodded hastily and walked to the kitchen, but not before casting one last glance at the children by the window. They remained there, their pleading eyes trailing after her. In the bustling kitchen, pots clattered and knives tapped cutting boards at a frenzied pace. Tom, the red-bearded chef with a ready smile, barked orders while deftly managing steaming pans. "Emily, dear, can you take these canapes to table 7? Tom asked, sliding a plate her way. Their eyes locked briefly, and he furrowed his brow. "Everything okay?" Emily mustered another smile. "Sure, just tired. Busy night." She took the plate, but her thoughts were far away. The children at the window. Could she do something? Slip them a plate of leftovers? But Karen was inflexible about the rules. Handing out free food was grounds for immediate dismissal. Emily needed her job. She had bills to pay, and her ill nephew was depending on her support. Back on the dining floor, Emily distributed the canapes, her professional smile masking inner turmoil. Her gaze kept drifting toward the window. The children were still there, their eyes a mixture of hope and resignation. Karen stood at the bar, surveying the room with hawk-like vigilance, her posture rigid, lips pursed into a thin line. Emily knew any misstep would be instantly noted. The clock on the wall showed 9:30 p.m. It would be hours before her shift ended. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision she was about to make. Help the children and risk everything, or ignore them and bear the guilt while pouring another round of drinks. Her gaze locked with that of a girl at the window. For a split second, everything else faded. In that child's eyes, Emily glimpsed a younger version of herself, frightened and hungry. Her heart beat faster. A determination began to take shape in her mind. With trembling hands, Emily grabbed another tray of champagne. Passing through the kitchen, her fingers grazed a plate of freshly baked croissants. The bell above the door chimed again. Emily looked from Karen to the children by the window, then toward the back door. It was time to choose. The clock at the Sunshine Bistro read 11:30 p.m., and Emily felt the weight of each passing minute. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but her mind was a whirlwind of plans to help the children she'd seen. The restaurant's buzz felt distant, muffled by the urgent pounding in her own head. While clearing a recently vacated table, Emily did a quick mental calculation. How many dinner rolls could disappear without anyone noticing? Maybe some of the fruit from the dessert garnishes? Her gaze drifted to the kitchen, where Tom, the red-haired chef with an easy grin, was conducting his team like a maestro. "Emily, dear, can you take these dishes to table 8? Tom's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to find the chef watching her with a curious expression. "Sure, Tom," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Tom frowned, leaning closer. "You okay? You seem distracted tonight." Emily hesitated, a sudden urge to confide in him washing over her. Tom was always kind, always understanding, but the risk was just too great. "Just tired," she murmured, grabbing the plates. "Long night." The chef nodded, though he didn't seem entirely convinced. "If you need to talk—" "Thanks, Tom," Emily interrupted gently, heading for table 8. As she turned, she nearly collided with Karen. The manager, a tall woman with impeccably styled gray hair, arched an eyebrow. "Is there a problem, Emily?" "No," Emily replied quickly, feeling beads of sweat form on her brow. "Just taking the order to table 8. Karen watched her for a long moment, her eyes as sharp as razors. "Well, hurry up. We have more customers coming in." Emily nodded, feeling Karen's stare burning into her back as she walked away. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. While serving table 8, Emily overheard snippets of conversation from a nearby table. "Mrs. Susan, yes, so devoted to that orphanage. I heard she spent the day there today, organizing a Christmas party for the children." Emily allowed herself a tiny, ironic smile. Susan, the owner of the Sunshine Bistro, was well known for her charity work with the local orphanage. It was a cruel twist, Emily thought, that while the owner was helping underprivileged children, others were literally on her doorstep, starving and forgotten. The doorbell chimed, signaling new arrivals. Emily watched a group of well-dressed executives enter, laughing loudly and shaking snow from their expensive coats. The stark contrast between them and the kids outside made her stomach clench. A fresh wave of determination surged through Emily. Returning to the kitchen, she seized a moment when Tom was preoccupied and slipped some rolls and slices of cheese into her apron pocket. Her heart pounded, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Emily!" Karen's voice sounded directly behind her, making her freeze. "What are you doing?" Emily turned slowly, forcing a casual smile. "Just checking the bread supply. I thought we might be running low." Karen narrowed her eyes. "That's not your job. Get back to the dining room. We have customers waiting." Emily nodded, feeling like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. She left the kitchen, but not before glancing out the window. The children were gone, but she knew they'd be back. As the night wore on, the tension in the restaurant mounted. More and more customers arrived, demanding prompt service. Emily moved from table to table, a blur of motion, delivering plates and refilling glasses, all the while keeping one eye on the front door and the other on Karen's watchful gaze. During a brief lull, Emily slipped out the back door. The cold night air was a shock to her system, but she barely felt it, her focus entirely on her mission. "Daisy," she called softly, peering into the shadows. "Kids?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then, like ghosts, the children emerged from the darkness. Daisy led them, her large eyes shining with cautious hope. "You came back," she whispered, her voice full of disbelief. Emily smiled, her heart aching. "I promised, didn't I?" She pulled the food from her apron, handing it out quickly. "I can't stay long, but I'll come back later, okay?" The children nodded, their thanks muffled by hungry mouthfuls. Daisy grabbed Emily's hand for a second, giving it a light squeeze. "Thank you," she said, her small voice brimming with gratitude. Emily felt tears sting her eyes. She wanted to do more, to say more, but time was short. With a final wave, she hurried back inside. Upon re-entering the kitchen, Emily nearly ran into Tom. The chef looked her up and down, noticing her flushed cheeks. "Out for some fresh air again?" he asked, his voice neutral but his eyes full of questions. Emily nodded, at a loss for words. Tom studied her for a moment before sighing. "Whatever it is, Emily, be careful. Karen is watching you." Before Emily could respond, Karen's shrill voice cut through the air. "Emily, "Where have you been? Table 12 has been waiting on their order for 10 minutes." Emily shot Tom an apologetic look and rushed into the dining room. As she served table 12, she could feel Karen's piercing stare drilling into her back. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly. Emily continued her work, moving like an automaton, her body in the restaurant, but her mind with the children outside. Each time she passed the front window, she cast a quick glance, hoping to see their familiar faces. By 1:30 a.m., the last customers finally began to trickle out. Emily's body ached with exhaustion, but she knew her night wasn't over. She had one last promise to keep. As she cleared the tables, she discreetly gathered leftover bread and other non-perishable food, her heart pounding with the knowledge of the risk she was taking, but the memory of Daisy's hungry eyes spurred her on. Emily. Karen's voice made her jump. The manager stood just a few feet away, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Emily swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the hidden food in her apron. This was it, the moment of truth. What could she say? How could she possibly explain? The air crackled with tension. Emily knew her next words could change everything. The clock at the Sunshine Bistro read 1:45 a.m. The restaurant was nearly empty, the last few patrons gathering their coats and slurring their goodbyes. Emily, body aching but mind on high alert, moved through the tables like a phantom, clearing plates and silverware. But her focus was on the front window. Outside, shrouded in the darkness, she could just make out the familiar silhouettes. The children had returned, just as she'd hoped. Emily. Tom's voice echoed from the kitchen. "Could you come here a minute?" She hesitated, torn between his call and the desperate urgency of helping the children. With one last look toward the window, Emily headed for the kitchen. Tom stood with his back to her, sorting through the night's leftovers. "Could you help me put these away?" he asked, gesturing to a stack of untouched bread and croissants. Emily's eyes widened. It was the perfect opportunity. "Sure," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. While Tom busied himself with the pots and pans, Emily began organizing the bread, discreetly slipping several items into the pockets of her large apron. Her heart was beating so loudly she was afraid Tom would hear it. "Everything okay over there?" Tom asked, turning around. Emily forced a smile. "All good. I'm done here. I'll just take out the trash." Tom nodded, though a flicker of concern remained in his eyes. "Emily," he began softly, hesitating, "if you need anything at all—" "I'm fine, Tom," she cut in gently. "Thank you." With hurried steps, Emily left the kitchen. The dining room was now almost deserted, save for one last couple finishing their drinks. Karen was at the bar, closing out the register. Emily took a deep breath. It was now or never. In one fluid motion, she grabbed a nearby bottle of water and headed for the back door. Just taking out the trash, she mumbled to the empty room. The frigid early morning air hit her like a physical blow. Emily shivered, though not just from the cold. Adrenaline was still pumping through her veins. "Daisy," she called softly. "Kids?" As if summoned from the darkness, the small, ragged figures emerged from the shadows. Daisy was at the front, her big eyes glimmering with a mixture of hope and fear. "You came," Emily whispered, a lump forming in her throat. Swiftly, she began pulling the bread and croissants from her apron. "Here, take these, quickly." The children approached, their trembling hands reaching for the food. Emily watched, her heart breaking as they devoured the rolls with a desperate hunger. That's when she heard it. The sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel behind her. "Emily, what on earth do you think you're doing?" Emily's blood ran cold. Slowly, she turned to face Karen. The manager stood in the back doorway, her eyes wide with shock and fury. "Karen, I can explain," Emily began, but she was cut off. "Explain?" Karen hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "Explain how you're stealing food from this restaurant to feed these vagrants?" The children recoiled, some of them darting back into the shadows. Daisy, however, stayed by Emily's side, clutching her hand. "They're not vagrants," Emily shot back, her own anger flaring. "They're hungry children, Karen, children who need help." Karen stepped forward, her features twisted with fury. "What they need is none of our concern. Our concern is keeping this restaurant afloat, something you clearly don't understand." The argument escalated, their voices rising in the cold night air. Emily could see from the corner of her eye the last customers peering through the window, drawn by the commotion. "How can you be so heartless?" Emily yelled, tears of frustration burning her eyes. "Look at them. They're starving." "And you're fired," Karen roared back. "Get your things and get out of here right now. I never want to see you near this restaurant again." Emily's world seemed to tilt on its axis. Fired. She knew the risk, but the reality of it hit her like a punch to the gut. It was then that a new voice cut through the chaos. "What's going on here?" Emily and Karen both turned, stunned. Standing at the entrance to the alley was Susan, the owner of the restaurant. Her eyes swept across the scene. Emily with tears streaming down her face, Karen flushed with rage, and the street children huddled in the shadows. "Susan," Karen began, her voice shaking slightly, "I caught Emily stealing food to feed these street kids. I fired her on the spot, of course." Susan looked at Emily, who was still holding Daisy's hand. "Is this true, Emily?" Emily swallowed but held her ground. "Yes, it's true. I couldn't just ignore them, Susan. They're hungry. Alone." Susan raised a hand, stopping her. Her eyes locked on Daisy, and something in her expression shifted. Recognition. Compassion. "Karen," Susan said calmly, "please escort the remaining customers inside and offer them a complimentary drink. Emily, you and the children come with me." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but one look from Susan silenced her. With a final, furious glance at Emily, she turned and went back into the restaurant. Emily felt Daisy squeeze her hand. Looking down, she saw fear in the little girl's eyes. "It's all right," Emily whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring Daisy or herself. Susan approached the children, her face softening. "You must be starving," she said gently. "Why don't we go inside and fix you something warm to eat?" The children exchanged wary glances. Daisy was the first to step forward, pulling Emily along with her. As the group headed for the restaurant's back entrance, Emily couldn't help but notice the intense look Susan gave Daisy. There was something there, an untold story. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, and Emily felt every eye in the room turn toward them. The few remaining customers, Karen, and even Tom from the kitchen, all watched in shocked silence as Susan led the unusual group to a table in the corner. The tension in the air was palpable. Emily knew this moment would change everything, for her, for the children, and maybe even for the Sunshine Bistro. As she sat with Daisy at her side, Emily met Susan's gaze. A silent question hung between them, a decision waiting to be made. What would happen next? The silence inside the Sunshine Bistro was deafening. Susan, the restaurant's owner, remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the street children Emily had brought in. But it was Daisy, the little girl with large eyes and tangled hair, who held her complete attention. "It can't be," Susan murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Emily, still holding Daisy's hand, stepped forward. "Susan, I can explain. I know I shouldn't have—" Susan raised a hand, cutting her off, her gaze never leaving Daisy's face. Slowly, she knelt down to the girl's level. "Daisy," Susan asked softly, her voice trembling, "do you remember me?" The little girl furrowed her brow, studying Susan's face. Then, like the sun breaking through clouds, a spark of recognition lit her eyes. "Mrs. Susan," Daisy whispered in disbelief. "From the orphanage?" The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Emily glanced from Daisy to Susan, completely bewildered. "You know each other?" Susan nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, we do." She turned to Emily, her expression a swirl of emotions. "I volunteer at the local orphanage on weekends. Daisy." Daisy was one of the children there. Memories flooded Susan's mind, vivid and painful. Flashback. Susan walked through the orphanage halls carrying a box of donated books. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the building, but a different sound caught her attention, a soft sob coming from a dark corner. There, huddled behind a bookshelf, was Daisy, her small shoulders shaking with silent tears. "Hello," Susan said gently, kneeling beside the girl. "What happened, sweetheart?" Daisy lifted a tear-stained face. "Nobody wants to play with me," she whispered. "They say I'm weird." Susan's heart broke. She set the box aside and sat next to Daisy. "You know, I felt weird too when I was a kid," she confessed. "But you know what? Being different is what makes us special." Daisy looked at her with curiosity. "Really?" Susan smiled, pulling a book from the box. "Absolutely. How about we read a story together? This one's about a very special girl who makes friends with a dragon." Daisy's eyes lit up. As Susan began to read, the girl snuggled closer, the outside world momentarily forgotten. End of flashback. Back in the present, Susan blinked away her tears. "Daisy, what happened? Why aren't you at the orphanage?" The girl lowered her gaze, her small hand gripping Emily's. "I ran away," she mumbled. They were going to send me far away, to a new family." I got scared. Emily felt her heart ache. Kneeling beside Daisy, she put a protective arm around the girl. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. Susan looked devastated. "We searched for you for weeks, Daisy. I feared the worst." The restaurant was silent, the few remaining customers, the kitchen staff, even Karen, all watching, transfixed and moved by the unfolding drama. Tom, the chef, stepped forward, breaking the silence. "Susan, maybe we should get these kids something to eat." "They look exhausted." Susan nodded, grateful for the suggestion. "Yes, of course. Tom, can you prepare something light? And maybe some hot chocolate?" As Tom disappeared into the kitchen, Susan stood and turned to Emily. "Emily, I don't know how to thank you. If it weren't for you—" Emily shook her head. "I just did what anyone should do. I couldn't leave them out there, starving." Karen, who had been watching silently, stepped forward. "Susan, about Emily's dismissal." Susan raised a hand. "Not now, Karen. Let's look after the children first. Then we'll talk about that." Daisy, who had been taking all this in quietly, suddenly spoke. "Mrs. Susan?" Her voice was small but full of emotion. "I'm sorry I ran away. I was scared." Susan knelt again, her eyes level with Daisy's. "Oh, sweetie, don't apologize. I'm just so happy you're safe." She hesitated before continuing. "Daisy, would you like to come back to the orphanage with me? I promise no one will make you go anywhere against your will." Daisy looked at Emily, doubt shining in her eyes. Emily smiled reassuringly. "It's all right, Daisy. Mrs. Susan will take good care of you, and I promise I'll visit if I can." The girl seemed to consider this for a moment, then slowly nodded. "Okay," she whispered. At that moment, Tom returned, carrying a tray of sandwiches and steaming mugs of hot chocolate. The other children, who had been watching wearily from the corner, approached, enticed by the smell. Susan stood looking at the group of hungry children, her face a mask of determination and compassion. "Let's feed them first," she said. "Then we need to figure out how to help each of them." Emily nodded, a wave of relief and gratitude washing over her. As she helped pass out sandwiches and hot chocolate, she couldn't help noticing the curious and admiring looks from the remaining customers and staff. The Sunshine Bistro, normally a bastion of elegance and formality, had transformed on this cold Christmas Eve. It had become a sanctuary of compassion and hope. As Daisy took a bite of her sandwich, her eyes flicked between Emily and Susan. There was gratitude there, but also a glimmer of something more. Hope, perhaps. Hope that at last she had found people who truly cared. Susan approached Emily, speaking quietly. "When the children finish eating, we need to talk. About your job, about Daisy, about all of this." Emily nodded, feeling a mixture of apprehension and hope. She knew tonight would change everything, for her, for Daisy, for all the children. The bell above the door chimed again, and all eyes turned to the entrance. A tall, imposing figure stepped inside, shaking the snow from her coat. "Susan, I got your message. What's happened?" The voice trailed off abruptly as she took in the scene before her. Susan stepped forward. "Ah, Catherine, I'm glad you're here. We have a lot to discuss." Emily regarded the newcomer, sensing her air of authority. Who was she? And how would her arrival affect the fate of these children? The night, already filled with surprises, seemed far from over. The Sunshine Bistro, normally a haven of elegance and tranquility, was now brimming with a tense, unusual energy. The street children, still chewing the last bites of their sandwiches, watched wide-eyed as the adults formed a tight circle near the bar. Susan, the restaurant's owner, ran a hand through her hair, her expression a mixture of worry and resolve. Her eyes lingered on Emily, who stood protectively beside Daisy. "Emily," Susan began, her voice low but firm, "I need to understand exactly what happened tonight. How long have you been secretly feeding these children?" Emily swallowed, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze on her. Karen, in particular, stared at her with a mix of anger and disapproval. "It started a few weeks ago," Emily admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I saw them through the window, looking in with so much hunger. I couldn't just ignore them." Susan nodded slowly, her eyes softening a bit. "Why didn't you come to me, or to Karen?" Emily let out a bitter laugh. "With all due respect, Susan, you're barely here, always busy with the orphanage." "And Karen," she glanced at the manager. Well, I think her reaction tonight says it all. Karen took a step forward, her face flushing with indignation. "This is a fine dining establishment, not a charity soup kitchen. What did you expect me to do? Let you give away our food for free? And let children starve on our doorstep?" Emily shot back, her voice rising. "Enough!" Susan intervened, raising her hands. "This isn't getting us anywhere." She turned to Emily, her expression softening. "Emily, I understand your intentions were good, but you have to see that what you did was complicated." Emily felt tears of frustration burn her eyes. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I've been in their shoes." Silence fell over the group. Susan tilted her head, encouraging Emily to continue. With a deep sigh, Emily began. "When I was a child, there was a time my family had nothing to eat. We went hungry for weeks. If it hadn't been for a kind neighbor who brought us leftovers from her restaurant?" She shook her head, unable to go on, emotion distorting her features. "Oh, Emily, I had no idea." It was then that Tom, the chef, stepped forward. "I knew," he said softly. All eyes turned to him. "I knew what Emily was doing, and I supported her." Karen gasped. "You knew, and said nothing?" Tom met her gaze without flinching. "No, I didn't, because I agreed with Emily. We couldn't just ignore these kids." Susan closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to process everything. When she opened them again, her gaze landed on Daisy, who was watching with large, frightened eyes. "As for you, young lady," Susan said, her voice considerably gentler, "I'm very worried. Why did you run away from the orphanage? Do you know how many people were worried about you?" Daisy lowered her head, her small fingers fiddling with the hem of her ragged shirt. I heard them talking about sending me away," she muttered, "to a new family. I got scared." Susan knelt in front of Daisy, gently taking her hands. "Oh, sweetheart, we'd never send you somewhere you didn't want to go. We were just discussing possibilities for your own good." Emily watched them, a tightness in her throat. The connection between Susan and Daisy was palpable, a blend of tenderness and concern that went beyond a typical volunteer-child relationship. Karen, however, looked unimpressed. "This is all very touching," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But what about the restaurant? What will our regular customers think if they find out we're feeding street kids out back?" Susan stood abruptly, facing Karen. "Our customers? That's what concerns you right now, Karen? There are starving children, and you're worried about what wealthy people will think?" The air crackled with tension. Tom placed a hand on Karen's shoulder, as if trying to calm her. "Maybe," he suggested quietly, "we can turn this into something positive. Show our customers that the Sunshine Bistro cares about the community." Emily nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, we could host charity events, use our influence to help." "Stop!" Karen shouted, her voice echoing through the restaurant. The children flinched, startled. "Are you all insane? This will destroy everything we've built." Susan took a step toward Karen, her face set with determination. "What we've built, Karen, is a successful business. But at what cost? Ignoring the suffering right on our doorstep?" Silence fell, all eyes on Susan, waiting to see what she would do next. At last, Susan turned to Emily. "Emily, what you did was against the restaurant's rules. There's no denying that." Emily felt her heart sink. "But," Susan continued, "your actions also forced us to confront an uncomfortable truth. We can't keep pretending we don't see what's happening around us." She then turned to Karen. "As for you, Karen, I understand your concern for the business. But if the Sunshine Bistro's success means closing our eyes to suffering, maybe we need to rethink what success really is." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but Susan raised a hand, silencing her. "I'm not saying we'll turn the restaurant into a shelter, but we can and must do more." Susan then looked at Daisy and the other children, her expression softened, a mix of tenderness and resolve lighting her eyes. "As for all of you, we'll make sure you have somewhere safe to stay tonight. Tomorrow, we'll contact the orphanage and figure out how to help each of you." Daisy stepped hesitantly toward Susan. Can I go back to the orphanage?" Susan smiled, stroking the girl's cheek. "Of course, dear, and I promise I'll visit you often, okay?" Emily watched, relief and gratitude washing over her. She had risked everything to help these children, and now the future looked uncertain, but filled with possibilities. "What about me?" Emily asked softly. "Am I still fired?" Susan exchanged a look with Karen before answering. "I think we all need a night to think. Tomorrow we'll have a serious conversation about the future, yours and the restaurant's." As the group began to disperse, each person processing the night's events, Emily couldn't help noticing the look Susan gave Daisy. It was filled with kindness, worry, and something else. Something Emily couldn't quite decipher. Whatever the future held, one thing was certain: the Sunshine Bistro and everyone involved would never be the same again. The chatter inside the Sunshine Bistro grew louder by the minute. What had started as a normal Christmas Eve had turned into a whirlwind of emotions and heated debates. The few customers still there, instead of leaving, had become invested participants in the unfolding drama. "You can't fire Emily!" The shrill voice of a middle-aged woman wearing a pearl necklace rang out. "She was just feeding hungry children, for goodness sake." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the dining room. Emily, standing near the children, felt her cheeks heat up. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, let alone having people defend her so passionately. Susan, visibly exhausted, held up her hands in a calming gesture. "Please, ladies and gentlemen, I understand your concern, but nothing," a man in a suit interjected, rising from his seat. "This restaurant has been a pillar of the community for years. We can't just ignore what's going on outside." Karen, her face red with frustration, tried to intervene. "Sir, we appreciate your loyalty to the Sunshine Bistro, but this is an internal matter." "Internal?" a young woman exclaimed, indignant. "Since when are hunger and suffering internal matters? We're talking about kids on the streets." The debate intensified, voices overlapping, some passionately defending Emily, others fretting about the restaurant's reputation, and still others proposing immediate solutions to help the kids. "What if we set up a fundraiser?" one customer suggested. "We could host a monthly charity dinner," another proposed. Emily watched in silence, her eyes drifting between the fervent faces of the customers, the confused expressions of the children, and the tense looks on Susan and Karen. Her heart pounded, a mix of hope and apprehension swelling within her. Tom, the chef, emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the commotion. He shot Emily a concerned glance before approaching Susan. "Boss," he said quietly, "maybe we should hear what they have to say. This could be a unique opportunity." Susan nodded slowly, her eyes flitting to Daisy, who clung to Emily's hand as though her life depended on it. The bond between the restaurant owner and the little street girl was almost tangible, charged with an emotion that went beyond mere compassion. "All right," Susan said finally, her firm voice cutting through the din. "We'll hear your suggestions. But remember, any decision must balance our good intentions with long-term feasibility." A momentary hush settled over the room, broken only by the soft sound of Daisy sniffling beside Emily. Then an elderly man who had been observing silently from a corner rose slowly. His immaculate suit and upright posture suggested someone of considerable influence. "If I may," he began, his voice calm yet authoritative, "I am Dr. Anderson, director of the New Horizons Foundation. Our work is precisely about building bridges between businesses and social projects." All eyes turned to him, eager and attentive. "What I see here," Dr. Anderson continued, "is a unique opportunity. The Sunshine Bistro has an enviable reputation and a loyal clientele. Why not use that to benefit these children?" He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Susan. "I propose a partnership. The restaurant could hold regular fundraising events, with a portion of the proceeds going to the orphanage and programs for street children. In return, our foundation would provide logistical and legal support to ensure everything is done properly." A ripple of approval coursed through the room. Susan and Karen exchanged astonished, thoughtful looks. Emily, feeling a surge of hope, stepped forward. "And what about the kids not in the system? The ones living on the streets, like Daisy was?" Dr. Anderson offered a gentle smile. "Excellent question, my dear. Part of the program could include a social work team to identify and assist those children, providing not just food, but also guidance, and, where possible, family reunification or referral to proper shelters." The tension in the air began to ease, replaced by a current of possibility and hope. Customers volunteered on the spot, some even pulling out checkbooks to make immediate donations. Karen, who had worn a skeptical expression all evening, appeared to reconsider. Could this really work?" she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Tears brimmed in Susan's eyes. She knelt beside Daisy once again, taking the girl's small hands. "What do you think, sweetheart? Would you like to help us make this happen?" Daisy, eyes wide with excitement, nodded vigorously. "Yes, please. Can I help other kids like me?" Susan's smile was radiant. "Of course you can, my love. You'll be our special consultant." Emily looked around, emotions swirling in her chest, relief, hope, but also a twinge of sorrow for her own past. Seeing the transformation unfolding before her eyes, she wondered if perhaps the time had come to share her full story. Tom sidled up beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did this, Emily," he said softly. "You started something incredible here." Emily swallowed hard, tears threatening to spill. "I just did what felt right," she whispered. The chef smiled, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Sometimes that's all it takes to change the world." As the room buzzed with plans and ideas, Emily allowed herself, for the first time that hectic night, to truly believe that everything would be okay. Her small act of kindness had set in motion something far greater than she ever could have imagined. On that Christmas Eve, the Sunshine Bistro was no longer just a restaurant. It had become a beacon of hope. The Sunshine Bistro bustled with an unusual energy in the early hours of Christmas morning. What began as a fine evening of dining had become an impromptu forum of compassion and new ideas. At the core, Susan, the restaurant owner, Karen, the no-nonsense manager, and Emily, the waitress with a big heart, formed an unlikely trio, bound by the extraordinary events of the night. It was in this moment of collective uncertainty that Tom, the red-haired chef with an easygoing smile, stepped forward, wiping his hands on his apron. "I have an idea," he announced, his deep voice cutting through the chatter. Everyone turned to him expectantly. What if we turn tomorrow's Christmas dinner into a charity event for the kids in the orphanage? A hush fell over the restaurant, followed by an explosion of excited voices. Susan blinked, taken aback by the boldness of the proposal. Tom, well, it's quite an idea. But how would we do that on such short notice? Karen, predictably cautious, frowned. That's madness. We have reservations, a planned menu, everything set. We can't just flip everything upside down overnight. Emily, however, felt a surge of hope. Why not? She challenged, her eyes shining with determination. If we all work together, we can make it happen. Tom nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. We can keep the original menu, but add some simpler, more affordable options. We can convert the dining room into a more welcoming space, invite the kids from the orphanage, and ask guests to donate on top of the meal cost. The debate that followed was heated. Susan, torn between excitement and logistical concerns, listened carefully to each argument. Karen rattled off a list of obstacles, financial, practical, reputational, while Emily and Tom provided creative solutions to each one. What about suppliers? Karen asked. We don't have enough ingredients for a larger event? Tom grinned. I know a few who'd be happy to donate on short notice, especially for a good cause. And the decorations? Susan inquired, starting to warm up to the idea. Emily stepped forward. I can call some artist friends. I'm sure they'd love to help create a festive, welcoming atmosphere. While the adults debated, Daisy, the little girl who had catalyzed the entire transformation, tugged timidly on Susan's sleeve. Mrs. Susan, she called, her small voice clear. Can I say something? Susan immediately knelt down, meeting the girl's eyes. Of course, sweetheart. What is it? Daisy took a deep breath, gathering her courage. At the orphanage, we always dreamed of a Christmas like this, with tasty food, pretty decorations, and people who care. Tears welled in her eyes. Many kids there never had a real Christmas. The entire dining room fell silent, moved by the child's simple yet powerful words. Susan felt her heart twist, a mix of compassion and resolve flooding her. Emily, seeing the emotion in everyone's eyes, stepped forward. I want to help, she said, her voice trembling with resolve. I know I've been fired, but I'd like to use whatever payout I have to help fund this event. Karen, who had maintained a skeptical stance, seemed to soften. Emily, you don't have to do that. We can discuss your job. But Emily shook her head. No, I want to do it. It's the right thing to do. Susan rose slowly, her gaze sweeping the room. She saw the determination on the faces of her staff, the hope in the children's eyes, and the anticipation in the customers who had stayed to witness it all. Very well, she said at last, her voice thick with emotion. Let's make this happen. But we need to think beyond tomorrow. We need to consider how to help Daisy and the other children long term. Tom nodded eagerly. How about we set up a regular program, maybe a monthly charity dinner? And we could offer cooking classes for the orphanage kids, one of the sous chefs suggested, joining in. Ideas flowed freely. A waiter proposed a mentorship program for teenagers interested in hospitality. A customer volunteered to give music lessons. Another pledged a regular donation of books and school supplies. Emily watched in wonder, her heart swelling with emotion. Her small act of kindness had sparked something far greater than she ever imagined. Sensing the momentum, Susan grabbed a napkin and a pen. All right, let's organize. First, tomorrow's event. Tom, you handle the menu and kitchen. Emily, you coordinate decorations and contact volunteers. Karen, she paused, looking at her manager. Karen sighed, but a faint smile tugged at her lips. I'll handle logistics and finances. Someone has to make sure we don't bankrupt the restaurant while saving the world. A ripple of laughter lightened the tension. Great, Susan continued. As for the long term, we'll form a committee to develop these programs, working closely with the orphanage and other local organizations. While Susan spoke, Emily noticed Daisy watching with wide, admiring eyes. The waitress knelt beside the girl. What do you think of all this, Daisy? She asked gently. Daisy smiled, a genuine smile that lit her entire face. "It's like a dream," she whispered. "I never thought so many people could care this much." Emily felt tears prickle her eyes. "Sometimes," she said, her voice trembling, "all it takes is one person to take the first step. Then magic happens." Overhearing, Susan approached the pair. She knelt, putting herself at Daisy's eye level. "Daisy, darling, I want you to know that no matter what happens, you have a place here with us. We'll take care of you and help other kids like you. I promise." Daisy's eyes filled with tears, and she threw herself into Susan's arms in a tight hug. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, witnessing the emotional moment. As planning continued around them, Emily took a moment to reflect. She remembered her own difficult childhood, the struggles she faced, and how a single act of kindness might have changed everything. Now she was at the center of a change that could impact dozens, maybe even hundreds of lives. Tom approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did this, Emily," he said softly. "You lit this spark." Emily shook her head, overcome with emotion. She knew the road ahead would be challenging. Transforming a Christmas Eve into a charitable event was one thing. Sustaining that spirit in the long run was another. But looking around, seeing the resolve in everyone's faces, the hope in Daisy's eyes, and the warmth of this newfound community, Emily believed they would succeed. The Sunshine Bistro on this extraordinary Christmas Eve was forever changed. From a simple fine dining restaurant, it had turned into the beating heart of a community united by compassion and hope. And as the clock struck the early hours of Christmas morning, Emily felt for the first time in a long while that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Christmas, after all, was about miracles, and here at the Sunshine Bistro, a miracle was just beginning to unfold. The Sunshine Bistro, usually an oasis of elegance and calm, now hummed with frantic activity. The clock on the wall read 4:30 a.m. But no one seemed to notice the late hour. The decision to host a Christmas charity event had been made, and now it was a race against time to make it happen. Susan, her hair disheveled and her eyes alight with determination, stood at the center of the organized chaos, assigning tasks and coordinating efforts. "Tom, I need a new menu in an hour. Something we can prepare in large quantities without sacrificing quality," she instructed, her voice firm but kind. The red-haired chef nodded, already scribbling ideas on a notepad. "I'm thinking a buffet with both hot and cold options. We'll do a traditional Christmas roast, but also include simpler, comforting dishes the kids will love." Meanwhile, Emily and a group of volunteers, a mix of staff and customers who had stayed to help, were rearranging the dining room. Tables were moved to create more open, welcoming spaces. Christmas decorations were repositioned, transforming the elegant venue into something cozier and more festive. "We can use these smaller tables to create little activity corners for the kids," Emily suggested, her face lit with excitement. "Maybe a drawing station and a reading corner." Susan, passing by, was impressed by Emily's suggestions. "That's brilliant. How do you know so much about what the kids need?" Emily hesitated briefly, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. I spent some time in an orphanage when I was a child," she admitted softly. "I know how much small details can matter." Susan rested a supportive hand on Emily's shoulder, a new understanding passing between them. "Your insight is invaluable, Emily. Thank you for sharing." To everyone's surprise, Karen had taken charge of logistics with impressive efficiency. She was on the phone, haggling with suppliers and arranging emergency deliveries. "No, we need those extra tablecloths here in 2 hours, not tomorrow," she insisted. "It's for a Christmas charity event." "Yes, I know it's short notice, but look, if you do this, I'll make sure the Sunshine Bistro does exclusive business with you next year. Deal?" "Great." Susan watched Karen, a mix of surprise and admiration on her face. "I never thought I'd see her so involved in something like this," she remarked to Emily. Emily smiled. Sometimes people just need the right opportunity to show what they're capable of. With the dining room taking shape, Susan and Emily retreated to the office to handle the critical task of contacting the orphanage. Susan dialed the number with trembling fingers. "Hello, Catherine? It's Susan. Sorry it's so early, but we have a situation." "No, nothing bad. Actually, something wonderful." As Susan explained, Emily looked over at Daisy, who had fallen asleep on a nearby sofa. The girl looked so small and vulnerable, yet there was a new peace in her face. "They're coming," Susan announced, hanging up with a radiant smile. Catherine is thrilled. She's going to bring as many kids as she can. "Emily, we need to think about transportation." "I can help with that," a voice offered from the doorway. It was Dr. Anderson, the customer who'd suggested partnering with his foundation. "I have contacts who can provide vans." News spread quickly, injecting fresh energy into the team. Tom emerged from the kitchen, smelling of spices and sauces. "The menu's set," he announced. "We've got roasted turkey, of course, but also mac and cheese, homemade chicken nuggets, a variety of salads, and plenty of desserts. Oh, and I'm making a special hot chocolate for the kids." Emily couldn't help but smile at the mention of hot chocolate. "They'll love that," she said, recalling how a simple cup of hot cocoa once felt like an unimaginable luxury. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the Sunshine Bistro was unrecognizable. The elegant dining space had become warm and inviting. Activity tables were set, stocked with colored paper and crayons. A cozy reading corner was assembled, piled with cushions and donated children's books. Karen, sporting dark circles under her eyes but an unwavering look of determination, checked her list for the 10th time. Food? Check. Decorations? Check. Activities? Check. Transportation? "Dr. Anderson, are the vans on the way?" He nodded, smiling. "They'll arrive in about 30 minutes. The kids should be here before noon." Susan surveyed the room, hardly believing the transformation. Her gaze landed on Emily, who was helping Daisy pick out a dress from donated clothing that had poured in overnight. "Emily," Susan called softly. When the waitress approached, she continued, I just want to thank you for everything. Your small act of kindness started something extraordinary here." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. "I only did what I thought was right," she murmured. "And that's why I want you to lead our new community outreach program," Susan said, taking Emily by surprise. "Your experience and compassion are exactly what we need." Before Emily could respond, Daisy ran up, spinning in her new red dress. "Look, Emily! Look, Mrs. Susan! I look like a Christmas princess!" They both laughed, the child's excitement infectious. "You look beautiful, Daisy," Susan said, kneeling. "Ready to welcome your friends from the orphanage?" Daisy nodded enthusiastically, then hesitated. Will they get to stay here too, like me?" Susan exchanged a meaningful look with Emily before answering. "We'll do everything we can to help each one, Daisy," she promised. "This is only the beginning." The sound of honking announced the arrival of the vans. Tom stepped out of the kitchen, flour smudged on his face but grinning from ear to ear. Karen straightened her posture, ready to receive the guests. Dr. Anderson and other volunteers lined up, prepared to assist. Emily felt a surge of emotion. Just hours ago, she was on the verge of losing her job for feeding a handful of hungry children. Now she stood at the center of something far bigger, something that could truly change lives. As the doors to the Sunshine Bistro opened to welcome the orphanage children, Emily knew this Christmas morning was just the start of an incredible journey, a journey of compassion, community, and transformation. The aroma of roasted turkey and hot chocolate filled the air, blending with the sound of childish laughter echoing through the dining room. The Sunshine Bistro on this Christmas morning was no longer just a restaurant. It was a home, a haven, a place of hope. And at the center of it all stood Emily, the waitress who dared to make a difference. With Daisy clutching her hand and Susan by her side, she stepped forward to greet the first of many guests, her heart brimming with gratitude and purpose. The Sunshine Bistro's Christmas miracle was only beginning. The midday sun bathed the Sunshine Bistro in golden light as the doors opened to welcome the special guests. The excited hum that had filled the air gave way to a reverent hush when the first children from the orphanage crossed the threshold. Wide-eyed, they took in the festive decorations, the tables laden with food, and the warm smiles greeting them. Many had never been somewhere so elegant, and the magic of the moment was almost tangible. Emily, standing beside Susan at the entrance, felt her heart constrict at the mixture of emotions on the children's faces: wonder, shyness, and a cautious hope that was almost painful to see. Daisy, in her red dress, was the first to break the spell. With a shout of joy, she ran to hug her friends, her happiness contagious and quickly spreading to the others. "Welcome to the Sunshine Bistro," Susan announced, her voice kind but brimming with emotion. "Today, this place is yours. Please, make yourselves at home." As if a charm had been lifted, the dining room erupted into activity. Children raced around, exploring the craft corners, delighting in the decorations, and naturally gravitating toward the food tables. Tom, in his element, proudly served plate after plate, describing each dish with infectious enthusiasm. "This here is our special Christmas turkey," he explained to a group of curious kids. "And over here, we've got mac and cheese made with 3 different kinds of cheese." The delicious scent of freshly prepared food filled the air, mingling with the sound of laughter and animated conversation. Off to one side, Karen, much to everyone's surprise, sat reading Christmas stories to a cluster of younger children, her usually stern voice softened by the spirit of the moment. Emily moved between tables, ensuring everyone was comfortable and well fed. She paused briefly, noticing a small girl eyeing a plate of chicken nuggets apprehensively. "Are you hungry?" Emily asked gently, kneeling beside the child. The little girl nodded, her eyes fixed on the food. "I've never seen so much food before," she whispered. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat as memories of her own orphanage days surfaced. "Well, today you can eat as much as you want," she said, placing a few nuggets on the child's plate. "And guess what? There's dessert after." The child's eyes lit up as she smiled timidly before beginning to eat. Emily lingered a moment longer, her heart full of conflicting emotions. Across the room, Susan noticed the interaction and was struck by the bond Emily seemed to share with the children. There was something in her expression, a blend of understanding and sadness, that piqued Susan's curiosity. As the afternoon wore on, the atmosphere in the Sunshine Bistro evolved into a true celebration of community and compassion. Longtime regulars mingled with the orphanage children, listening to their stories, offering words of encouragement, and in many cases, promising ongoing support. In a particularly moving moment, Daisy stood on a chair, calling for everyone's attention. Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. "I just want to thank you all. I used to think nobody cared about kids like us. But today I know there are good people in the world." Not a single eye was dry when she finished. Sensing the moment, Susan picked up a microphone. "Dear friends," she began, her voice thick with emotion, "what we're witnessing today is more than a simple Christmas dinner. It's a reminder of the power of compassion and the importance of community support." She paused, letting her gaze travel across the room. "Each child here deserves love, safety, and opportunities. And it's up to us, as a community, to ensure they have that. The Sunshine Bistro is committed to doing its part, but we need all of you." Susan's words seemed to strike a chord. Instantly, offers of assistance poured in. A local business owner pledged scholarships. A retired teacher volunteered tutoring services. Families offered to host children on weekends. Emily, listening, felt as though her heart might burst. She found herself sharing her own story with a group of older kids, explaining how she overcame the challenges of growing up in an orphanage. "You're strong," she told them, her voice wavering. "And now you have people who believe in you. Don't ever forget that." Susan, passing by, caught the tail end of Emily's speech. She stopped, placing a gentle hand on the waitress's shoulder. "You're amazing with them," Susan remarked softly. Emily dabbed at her tears, smiling shakily. I know how it feels, being on the other side." Susan nodded, finally understanding the depth of Emily's connection to these children. "You've turned your pain into compassion, Emily. That's a precious gift." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the Sunshine Bistro's windows, the event reached its peak. Children with full bellies and bright smiles played or dozed in cozy corners. Adults swapped contact information and made plans for future collaborations. In the center of it all, Emily, Susan, and Daisy formed an inseparable trio. Daisy, exhausted but beaming, nestled into Susan's arms while Emily looked on with a tender smile. "What happens now?" Daisy asked, her eyelids heavy with sleep. Susan exchanged a meaningful glance with Emily before responding. "Now, sweetheart, we start building a better future. For you and for all the other children." Emily nodded, feeling a new resolve stirring within her. "And we'll do it together." As the Sunshine Bistro wound down its day of redemption, it was clear to everyone present that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning. A journey of compassion, community, and transformation that promised to change not only the children's lives, but the entire town. At the heart of this transformation were three unlikely souls brought together by fate. Susan, the restaurant owner with a heart of gold. Emily, the waitress who turned her own pain into a beacon of hope. And Daisy, the street child whose courage touched them all. Christmas, after all, was about miracles, and in the Sunshine Bistro, one such miracle had blossomed, destined to grow for many years to come. By the time the final guests left the Sunshine Bistro, the sun had begun to set. The air was thick with the lingering aroma of the feast and the echoes of children's laughter. Susan stood, a mixture of exhaustion and fulfillment, watching her staff begin to tidy the dining room. Emily was near the window, gazing at the orange-tinted horizon. Her hands trembled slightly, and her shoulders were tense, signs that did not escape Susan's notice. "Emily," Susan called softly, approaching her. "Are you all right?" Emily turned, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Susan, I need to tell you something. In private, if that's okay." Concerned and intrigued, Susan nodded, guiding Emily to her office at the back of the restaurant. She closed the door, creating a cocoon of privacy. "What's going on, Emily?" Susan asked gently, sitting down and motioning for Emily to do the same. Emily drew a shaky breath, her hands twisting anxiously in her lap. "Susan, the reason I care so much about these kids, the reason I risked everything to help them, it's because I've been where they are." Susan tilted her head, confused. "What do you mean? Emily paused, summoning courage. "I grew up in the same orphanage as Daisy." The silence was deafening. Susan felt as though the floor had dropped out from under her. You were an orphan?" Emily nodded, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. "I was abandoned as a baby, spent my first 12 years in that orphanage." The revelation hung between them like a heavy weight. Susan struggled to speak. I had no idea." Emily's gaze turned inward, memories surfacing in sharp detail. Flashback. An 8-year-old Emily sat alone in the orphanage yard, watching other children play. Her dress was faded and patched, her shoes too worn for her size. "Emily," a voice called. It was Mrs. Catherine, the orphanage director. "Come, dear, there's a family here to meet you." Emily's heart pounded. Another family, another glimmer of hope. She followed Mrs. Catherine to the visitation room where a smiling couple awaited her. Hours later, Emily was back in the yard, alone once more. She overheard snippets of the adults' conversation. "She's too quiet, maybe a younger child. Sorry, but we don't think this is the right fit." Emily shrugged, swallowing her tears. Another rejection, another hope dashed. End of flashback. "It was tough," Emily continued, her voice trembling. "Every time a child got adopted, I felt both happy for them and crushed to be left behind." Susan listened, horrified and moved. "Emily, I'm so sorry. No one else knows, Emily said quietly. That's why I had to help Daisy and those kids. I know exactly what it's like to be hungry, alone, feeling forgotten by the world. Susan stood abruptly, walking to the window, her mind racing with this new information. How did you get out of that situation? Emily smiled sadly. When I was 12, I was adopted by a wonderful couple. They gave me love, education, opportunities. But the scars, they never fully heal. Susan turned back, looking at Emily with new eyes. That's why you risked your job, because you saw yourself in those children. Emily nodded. Any one of them could have been me, and I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to make a difference, I would. They fell silent, the office heavy with emotion and newly discovered understanding. Emily, Susan began, her voice shaking, I'm sorry. Sorry I never noticed, that I didn't understand. Emily rose, approaching Susan. It's not your fault. I never told anyone here. But now, after everything that happened, after meeting Daisy, she paused, gathering her thoughts. Susan, the adoption and foster care system can be complicated and often fails. But with people who genuinely care, who really want to make a difference, we can change lives. Susan nodded, tears trailing down her cheeks. You're right. And we will make that difference, Emily. Together. A gentle knock on the door interrupted them. It opened slowly, revealing Daisy, her curious eyes peering in with concern. Are you okay? The little girl asked timidly. You sounded sad. Emily and Susan exchanged a look before Emily knelt, opening her arms to Daisy. The girl ran into them, and Susan joined their embrace, arms encircling them both. We're fine, sweetheart, Emily whispered, stroking Daisy's hair. In fact, we're more than fine. Susan, still hugging them both, felt a surge of determination. Daisy, she said softly, Emily just told me a very special story, one that will help us take even better care of you and the other children. Daisy looked up, curiosity evident. What story? Emily exchanged a glance with Susan before smiling at Daisy. It's a long one, sweetheart, but the most important thing is that it reminds us how much we need to look out for each other. For a long moment, they stayed intertwined in a warm embrace. It felt as though the universe had conspired to unite three wounded souls, offering them a chance for healing and redemption. When they finally parted, all three wore a renewed light in their eyes. Susan gazed at Emily and Daisy, feeling she was witnessing the start of something new. I think, Susan said slowly, a smile forming on her lips. We have a lot to discuss and plan. How about some hot chocolate while we talk about the future? Daisy clapped her hands excitedly, and Emily smiled, wiping away the last of her tears. Hand in hand, the three left the office. A tangible aura of hope hung in the air. The Sunshine Bistro, which began the night as a mere restaurant, now seemed destined to become the epicenter of a far-reaching change. And at the core of that change were three hearts, bound by improbable circumstances, ready to face the challenges ahead and determined to make a difference, one child at a time. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, a day brimming with possibility. The Sunshine Bistro, still drowsy from the previous night's excitement, seemed somehow changed, like the building itself had been touched by the magic of what had transpired. Susan arrived early, her footsteps echoing through the quiet dining room. She paused, recalling the scenes of the night before. Children's laughter, generosity overflowing, and Emily's shocking revelation. With a determined sigh, she headed to her office. Soon, Emily and Karen joined her. The three women gathered around Susan's desk, steaming cups of coffee in their hands and anticipation thick in the air. Thank you both for coming in so early, Susan began, her voice calm but resolute. After last night, we have a lot to discuss. Karen nodded, her usually stern features softened by a thoughtful expression. It was a very enlightening night. Emily stayed silent, her eyes trained on the coffee cup in front of her, clearly anxious about how her confession would be received. Susan inhaled deeply before continuing. First, I want you both to know I've made a decision. After everything that happened, after seeing our potential impact, I've decided I want to adopt Daisy. A stunned silence followed, broken by the sound of Emily's cup rattling against its saucer. Her eyes widened, emotions flickering across her face. Susan, that's... Wow, Emily finally managed. Are you sure? Susan nodded, a soft smile on her lips. I am. And Emily, your story only solidified that decision. Karen cleared her throat, looking a bit awkward. Susan, I don't mean to sound insensitive, but have you considered all the implications? Running a restaurant while raising a child? That's why I'll need everyone's help, Susan said, her gaze shifting between Karen and Emily. Especially yours, Emily. Your experience will be invaluable. Emily straightened in her chair, a new confidence evident in her posture. Of course, I'm here for whatever you need. The adoption process can be complicated and emotionally draining. And the adjustment, well, it takes time. For nearly an hour, Emily shared insights from her own experiences, the challenges of adapting to a new family, the lingering insecurities, the necessity of patience and understanding. Above all, Emily concluded, Daisy must feel unconditionally loved, knowing this is her permanent home, no matter what. Susan listened intently, occasionally taking notes. Karen, surprisingly, also seemed deeply invested. Emily, Karen said hesitantly, your story, it changes a lot. I think we all need to reconsider how we view things around here. Susan nodded emphatically. Exactly, which is why I want to expand our support programs for underprivileged kids. Emily, with your background, you'd be perfect to lead the initiative. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I'd love that. Being able to make this kind of difference. The conversation then shifted to practical ideas, charity dinners, mentorship programs, partnerships with local schools. The Sunshine Bistro would evolve into more than a restaurant. It would be a hub of hope for the community. When the meeting ended, a tangible sense of purpose and unity lingered among the three women. Karen, to everyone's surprise, was the first to offer assistance with the program's logistical side. Now, Susan said, standing up, I think it's time we have a very important talk with a certain little girl. Emily and Susan found Daisy in the kitchen, where Tom was teaching her how to make pancakes. The child's face was dusted with flour, but her smile was radiant. Daisy, sweetheart, Susan called softly, could we talk for a bit? Seated in a quiet corner of the restaurant, Susan, Emily, and Daisy formed a small circle. Daisy, Susan began, her voice trembling slightly. Remember how we talked about finding a permanent home for you? Daisy nodded, her large eyes locked on Susan's. Well, I've been thinking and talking with Emily, and I wanted to know what you'd think if I adopted you? If you came to live with me for good? The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Slowly, Daisy's face lit up like the dawn sky. So, you want to be my mom? She whispered, as though afraid to hope. Susan nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, sweetheart, if you want that. With a cry of joy, Daisy hurled herself into Susan's arms. Emily watched, her own eyes brimming with tears, feeling a sweet pang of her own memories. What about Emily? Daisy suddenly asked, turning to the waitress. Will you stay with me too? Emily exchanged a touched look with Susan before answering. I'll always be around, Daisy. I promise. Word spread quickly through the restaurant. Tom emerged from the kitchen with a tray of celebratory cupcakes. Other staff gathered around, offering congratulations and pledging their support. Later, as Susan filled out the initial paperwork to begin the adoption process, Emily sat beside her, offering advice and emotional support. It's going to be quite a journey, Emily murmured, but you both deserve this, and we'll all be here to help. Susan lifted her eyes from the forms, a weary yet joyful smile on her face. Thank you, Emily, for everything. None of this would have happened without you. The two women exchanged a look of profound understanding. The Sunshine Bistro had become more than a restaurant. It was the start of a family, a community built on compassion and hope. As the sun set outside, bathing the room in a golden glow, the future appeared bright with endless possibilities. For Daisy, for Susan, for Emily, and for all the children whose lives would be touched by the miracle that began on a Christmas Eve at the Sunshine Bistro. The next morning, as dawn's first rays peeked over the horizon, Susan opened the doors of the Sunshine Bistro. The restaurant, silent and still, seemed to hum with the possibilities of a new day. Susan smiled, recalling how only a few weeks ago this place was just a business. Now it was the beating heart of a transformation. Daisy, still sleepy, clung to Susan's hand as they stepped inside, her eyes shining with new hope and belonging. "So," Daisy asked, her tiny voice brimming with anticipation, "this is our home now?" Susan knelt, meeting the girl's gaze. "Yes, sweetheart, this will be our home, and more than that, it'll be a home for many other kids who need help." The sound of footsteps heralded Emily's arrival, her face lit by a warm smile. "Good morning, family," she said, and the word family carried a special weight. The three shared a hug, a quiet moment of connection before the day began. Emily already carried a stack of papers, drafts for the new community support program. "I've got some ideas," she began as they headed to the kitchen for breakfast. "I thought we could start with a mentoring program. Kids from the orphanage could come regularly, learn cooking skills, but also receive emotional support." Susan agreed enthusiastically. "That's brilliant, Emily, and we can expand it to include financial literacy lessons, homework help." Daisy, who had been listening quietly, raised her hand shyly. I want to help too. Maybe tell the other kids what it's like to have a new family." Susan's heart melted at Daisy's request. "Of course you can, my love. Your voice and experiences are so important." As they prepared breakfast together, the three continued brainstorming, their dreams and plans intertwining like the aromas filling the kitchen. Soon other staff members arrived. Tom burst in with his usual enthusiasm, only to pause at the homely scene before him. "Well, well," he grinned, "looks like we've got ourselves a little family here." Karen arrived soon after, her usual businesslike demeanor softened by a genuine smile. "Emily," she called, "I'd like to discuss some ideas for the program. I was thinking about how we can optimize our resources for maximum impact." Emily and Susan exchanged a grateful glance. The shift in Karen's attitude was tangible, a testament to the transformative power of recent events. As the restaurant came to life around them, preparing for another busy day, Susan gathered everyone for a brief meeting. "As you all know," she began, "a lot has changed in the past few weeks. The Sunshine Bistro isn't just a restaurant anymore. It's a home, a sanctuary, a place of hope." She paused, taking in each face. And that's largely due to Emily's courage in sharing her story. Emily, feeling the weight of so many eyes, took a deep breath before speaking. "Growing up in an orphanage wasn't easy," she began, her voice trembling yet resolute. "But it taught me the value of empathy and community. Now we have the chance to make a real difference in other children's lives." Tom, eyes brimming with tears, was the first to speak. "Emily, your strength is inspiring. Count me in for whatever the program needs." Karen, usually so reserved, surprised everyone by standing and embracing Emily. "Thank you," she whispered, "for opening our eyes." The meeting became a collective brainstorming session. Ideas flowed, from educational initiatives to monthly fundraising events. Enthusiasm spread like wildfire, even among the staff who had been skeptical before. By midday, the Sunshine Bistro buzzed with renewed purpose. Regular customers, upon hearing the changes, offered assistance and resources. Word traveled fast through town, and soon the phone wouldn't stop ringing with offers of volunteers and donations. Emily, in her new leadership role, seemed to bloom. Her personal experiences lent an invaluable perspective to every aspect of the initiative. She spoke with a passion that energized everyone around her, her words imbued with authenticity. As dusk fell, Susan found a quiet moment to reflect. She watched Emily interact with Daisy and a few other orphanage kids who had come for a visit, her heart swelling with gratitude and hope. Amazing, isn't it? Karen's voice startled her. The manager stood beside her, a contemplative look on her face. How one person can change everything. Susan nodded, smiling. Emily showed us the power of vulnerability, of empathy. She turned her pain into a gift for others. They fell silent, watching the scene before them. The Sunshine Bistro, once just a fine dining restaurant, now pulsated with life and a shared mission. When night finally fell and the last customer departed, Susan, Emily, and Daisy gathered in the kitchen, exhausted but elated. They sipped hot chocolate together. "Let's step outside," Susan suddenly suggested. "I want to show you something." Together they walked onto the small back balcony. The sky was starting to lighten again, the first hints of dawn painting it in pale pink and orange. "A new day," Emily murmured, her voice thick with emotion. Daisy, standing between Susan and Emily, held their hands. "Our family," she said simply, with the innocent wisdom of a child. Susan felt joyful tears in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, our family, and not just us three, but all the people we'll reach through our work." As the sun rose slowly, bathing them in golden light, they stood in silence, united by a bond stronger than blood, the bond of compassion, shared hope, and a chosen family. Gazing at the glowing horizon, Emily felt a peace she had never known. All her struggles and pain had led her to this moment, one of redemption and found purpose. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes our hardest experiences become our greatest strengths. They teach us empathy and give us a purpose." Susan squeezed Emily's hand, nodding, "and remind us it's never too late for a fresh start." Daisy, her eyes shining in the dawn light, smiled. "And that family is who chooses us, who loves us." The three embraced, their silhouettes merging against the fiery sky. Behind them, the Sunshine Bistro was no longer just a restaurant. It was a beacon of hope, a testament to the transformative power of love and compassion. And as the new day broke, it carried with it the promise of countless lives touched and hearts changed, all because one brave waitress chose to make a difference, one compassionate restaurant owner opened her heart, and one little street girl reminded everyone of the true meaning of family. The sun finally crested the horizon, bathing them in golden light. A new day, a new beginning, and with it the certainty that no matter how dark the night, dawn always brings the promise of hope and renewal. The Sunshine Bistro had been forever changed by the events of that Christmas Eve. What began as a simple act of kindness had sparked a movement, drawing people from all walks of life into a cause bigger than themselves. Now, as the first rays of sun spread across the sky, the future shone bright with possibility. For Emily, for Susan, for Daisy, and for every child whose life would be touched by the miracle born under the Sunshine Bistro's roof. Because that, after all, was the true spirit of Christmas, the power to change lives through compassion, hope, and a little bit of courage.